Marius enters the shadow. Part 1. That voice which, through the twilight, had called Marius to the barricade of the Rue de la Chanvrerie, sounded to him like the voice of destiny. He wished to die. The opportunity presented itself. He was knocking at the door of the tomb. A hand in the shadow held out the key. These dreary clefts in the darkness before despair are tempting. Marius pushed aside the bar, which had let him pass so many times, came out of the garden, and said, "Let us go." Mad with grief, feeling no longer anything fixed or solid in his brain, incapable of accepting anything henceforth from fate, after these 2 months passed in the intoxications of youth and of love, whelmed at once beneath all the reveries of despair, he had now but one desire, to make an end of it very quick. He began to walk rapidly. It happened that he was armed, having Javert's pistols with him. The young man, whom he thought he had seen, was lost from his eyes in the streets. Marius, who had left the Rue Plumet by the boulevard, crossed the Esplanade and the bridge of the Invalides, the Champs-Élysées, the Place Louis XV, and entered the Rue de Rivoli. Marius entered through the Delorme arcade into the Rue Saint-Honoré. As he receded from the Palais Royal, there were fewer lighted windows. The shops were entirely closed. Nobody was chatting in the doors. The street grew gloomy, and at the same time the throng grew dense. For the passes now were a throng. Nobody was seen to speak in this throng, and still there came from it a deep and dull hum. After having crossed the belt of the multitude and passed the fringe of troops, he found himself in the midst of something terrible. Not a passer more, not a soldier, not a light, nobody. Solitude, silence, night. A mysterious chill which seized upon him. To enter a street was to enter a cellar. He continued to advance. He took a few steps. Somebody passed near him running. Was it a man? A woman? Were there several? He could not have told. It had passed and had vanished. By a circuitous route, he came to a little street, which he judged to be the Rue de la Poterie. He walked very near the posts and guided himself by the walls of the houses. A little beyond the barricade, he seemed to catch a glimpse of something white in front of him. He approached, it took form. It was 2 white horses, the omnibus horses unharnessed by Bousset earlier, which had wandered at a chance from street to street all day long, and had finally stopped there, with the exhausted patience of brutes, who no more comprehended the ways of man than man comprehends the ways of Providence. From that moment he met nothing more. This whole route resembled a descent down dark stairs. Part 2. Marius had arrived at the markets. There all was more calm, more obscure, and more motionless than still in the neighboring streets. One would have said that the icy peace of the grave had come forth from the earth and spread over the sky. A red glare, however, cut out upon this dark background the high roofs of the houses which barred the Rue de la Chanvrerie on the side towards Saint-Eustache. It was a reflection of the torch which was blazing in the barricade of Corinth. Marius directed his steps toward this glare. He felt that he was very near what he had come to seek, and he walked on tiptoe. He reached in this way the elbow of that short end of the Rue Mondétour, which was, as we remember, the only communication preserved by Enjolras with the outside. Around the corner of the last house on his left, cautiously advancing his head, he looked into this end of the Rue Mondétour. A little beyond the black corner of the alley, he perceived a light upon the pavement, a portion of the wine shop, and behind, a lamp twinkling in a kind of shapeless wall, and men crouching down with muskets on their knees. All this was within 20 yards of him. It was the interior of the barricade. Marius had but one step more to take. Then the unhappy young man sat down upon a stone, folded his arms, and thought of his father. He thought of that heroic Colonel Pontmercy, who had been so brave a soldier. He said to himself that his day had come to him also, that his hour had at last struck, that after his father he was also to be brave, intrepid, bold, to run amid bullets, to bare his breast to the bayonets, to pour out his blood, to seek the enemy, to seek death, that he was to wage war in his turn, and to enter upon the field of battle, and that that field of battle upon which he was about to enter was the street, and that war which he was about to wage was civil war. He saw civil war yawning like an abyss before him, and then in it he was to fall. And then he shuddered, and he began to weep bitterly. It was horrible, but what could he do? Live without Cosette he could not. Since she had gone away, he must surely die, and then indeed. To have come so far, and to recoil, to have approached the danger and to flee, to have come and looked into the barricade and to slink away. A prey to the swaying of his thoughts, he bowed his head. Suddenly he straightened up. A sort of splendid rectification was wrought in his spirit. There was an expansion of thought fitted to the confinity of the tomb. To be near death makes us see the truth. The vision of the act upon which he felt himself, perhaps upon the point of entering, appeared to him no longer lamentable, but superb. The war of the street was suddenly transfigured by some indescribable interior throw of the soul before the eye of his mind. Let us see. Why should his father be indignant? Are there not cases when insurrection rises to the dignity of duty? The country laments, so be it, but humanity applauds. Besides, is it true that the country mourns? France bleeds, but liberty smiles, and before the smile of liberty, France forgets her wound. An enormous fortress of prejudices, of privileges, of superstitions, of lies, of exactions, of abuses, of violence, of iniquity, of darkness, is still standing upon the world with its towers of hatred. It must be thrown down. This monstrous pile must be made to fall. To conquer Austerlitz is grand. To take the Bastille is immense. Even while thinking thus, overwhelmed but resolute, hesitating, however, and indeed shuddering in view of what he was about to do, his gaze wandered into the interior of the barricade. The insurgents were chatting in an undertone without moving about, and that quasi-silence was felt which marks the last phase of delay. Above them at the third-story window, Marius distinguished a sort of spectator or witness, who seemed to him singularly attentive. It was the porter killed by Le Cabuc. From below, by the reflection of the torch hidden among the paving stones, this head was dimly perceptible. Nothing was more strange in that gloomy and uncertain light than that livid, motionless, astonished face, with its bristling hair, its staring eyes, and its gaping mouth, leaning over the street in an attitude of curiosity. One would have said that he who was dead was gazing at those who were about to die. A long trail of blood, which had flowed from his head, descended in ruddy streaks from the window to the height of the first story, where it stopped.